Hey Mohammed.
Thank you so much.
Hey Mohammed, what matter hai? Sifi, and what is the way say of English you uncle. So thanks very much. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, with your auntie. So thank you very much for this invitation. And I will just briefly talk about my impressions from this conflict in Laascanood, and also maybe briefly about the background and the history. So I have been researching this area exactly. For the last 20 years, literally. So I have been the first time in Las Anod in 2002, when I before I started doing my PhD research. I've been in Somaliland. Let's say I started in Hargeisa, I went to Edgabo, and then I went to Las Anod in, I believe it was August 2002. And the interesting thing was, when I traveled from Hargeisa to Las Anod, it was like almost traveling to another country. So it was like I traveled to Bor'o. In Bor'o, you exchange the money, Somaliland shilling to Somali shilling. And then I think, I believe around Oak, the driver changed the number plate from the Somaliland number plate to the black number plate, which was also used in Puntland. And people said it's a Somali number plate. And when you arrived in Las Anod in 2002, there was a blue flag on all the walls, and people were wearing little hats with, the Somali flag on this hat. So basically, I traveled, you can say, from Somaliland to Somalia when traveling from Hargeisa to Las Anod in 2002. Um, and then, I was in those days, I was just a young student. It was even before I started my PhD, and I was obviously also quite naive. So I returned to Hargeisa. I was all on my own. I just took a public transport for $10 between Hargeisa and Las Anod. So I returned eventually after a few, maybe 1 week or so in Las Anod. I returned back to Hargeisa. And then I had an appointment with some official person, a politician actually in Hargeisa in those days. She was a minister back then. And then I had a brief conversation with her in her office. And she wanted to give me, she thought, okay, there's a foreigner, a white guy. I will introduce him to the story of my country. So she told me all about, being British and having been an independent state before Somalia became independent on 1st of July. So having 5 days of independence from 26th of June to 1st of July, 1960, and so on and so forth, and about the destruction which had been caused by the Somali army in the 1980s, particularly in the late 1980s in Hargeisa. And but although she gave me all this talk, and wanted to say, so we are all Somaliland now. We all rebuilt our country. And then I was so naive. I thought she was an intellectual. It was actually Edna Arden. So, and I thought she's intellectual. So I tell her what I have seen in Las Anod. And I said, I just was 2 days ago in Las Anod and I saw everywhere the Somali flag. And people don't believe that they are part of Somaliland. And she simply threw me out of her office. She shouted at me. She said, "Read a book, read the books, read the history," and she threw me out of her office. And this was quite shocking for me back then because I had read a lot of books about Somali history, starting from the colonial time, and I wrote actually my master thesis on Somali issues, covering the pre-colonial, the colonial, and the post-colonial history. So when she threw me out of the office, I was shocked, and I was wondering how an intellectual person who has seen the world, is speaking many different languages, and who knows she was actually part of Somali history, how she can ignore the fact that the political reality in Hargeisa and in Las Anod is very different in 2002. And going from there right into what's happening in Las Ano today, at least that's my way of making sense of it. I think one of the underlying causes for the crisis and also the violence erupting in and around Las Anod is the persistent ignorance of the leadership of Somaliland about the different political realities on the ground. And then you can add to this different political developments, different economic developments. So of course, like in Somaliland, in the area between Hargeisa, Berbera, and Bur'o, and also including the Western territories like Boroma, you know, the de facto state of Somaliland has developed over the last 20 years. So I could see it. The first time I went to Hargeisa in 2002, it was a relatively small town. There were lots of traces from the war, lots of broken houses, and so on. I mean, if you return to Hargeisa today, it looks in parts like Addis Abeba or parts of Nairobi. It looks much, in my impression, bigger and more impressive than Djibouti. So, I mean, Hargeisa over the last 20 years has developed from a relatively small war-torn town into a big Eastern African or Horn of African capital. Um, but if you travel east, I mean, Somaliland has remained very similar between 2002 and I believe 2015. I saw it, almost every year. I was visiting Laascanood, and there was not dramatic change. There was some. I mean, the last time I was in Laascanood, I believe, was maybe 2017, 2018. The last 6 years, I haven't seen it, and I heard from a colleague who did some research, so there was more economic development taking place, a little bit investment by Somaliland or some investment by Somaliland in the university, in schools, in some roads, in the hospital particularly. There was also diaspora investment. But still, if you compare the development which took place in Hargeisa and Berbera and Bur'o, and the development which took place in the regions Sol and Sanak particularly, there's a huge discrepancy, right? So, I mean, economically, there was a huge difference, or there's a huge difference between central Somaliland and the eastern regions. And also politically, there's a huge difference between, how the state functions in Hargeisa, Berbera, Bur'o, and how politics are done in this region, Sur, Sanak, and Ain. So, I mean, I just spoke with a friend of mine who I know since 2004, who is a resident of Buhatl, and I just spoke with him 2 days ago. And we talked about the political situation, and he told me, it's like when you were there, like I was there in 2004 and again in 2015 in Buhatl, and he said it's just, the elders are ruling the place, traditional authorities, Chief Akaka, Inahachi Omar Ame. So these people are sitting together and discussing political, economic, social issues. There is a representation of Puntland, there is a representation of SSC. The governor of Somaliland has been chased out 2 or 3 days ago, but before that, there was also a representation of Somaliland in Buhatli, but this is all nominal. This is not a real, these administrations do not have real political power on the ground in Buhatli, but it's the traditional authorities. And I think this also goes, this also explains why today in Laascanood we have the Isimada, the traditional authorities, Garat Chama, Garat Ali, Garat Chama, Garat Ismail, Garat Mukhtar, and many others. I mean, 14 Bulbahante Garats and one Fikishini Garat, who are the overall authorities over the people in the region. And then you have Gudiga Sedichio Sodonka, the council, which is, so to say, managing the daily affairs. It's a very different political structure from what you encounter in Hargeisa. So if I go to Hargeisa, I would probably meet somebody who is a minister or somebody who is a director general or somebody, so on and so forth. But in the Sol, Sanak, and Ain regions, you meet Garat Hebel, your Chief Akel Hebel, your Akel Hebel, your Odaikan. So you meet traditional authorities, and they have a different way of doing politics. And I think all these logics are clashing currently in Laascanood. So a different way of looking at history, different political trajectories, different economic trajectories. And I think the big mistake by Musabishi and his government was to simply believe he could enforce his will on the local population by force, and obviously he failed, and yeah, that's where it stands at the moment. Thank you very much. So, do we have any question and answers, or that's basically it? One is yeah.